How's everybody doing this morning?
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Michael.
I have, unfortunately, a hard conflict at the 30-minute mark, so I will abandon you to the tender mercies of the rest of the crowd at that time.
Sounds good. I was going to say something about wolves, but I haven't had coffee yet, so it wouldn't have come out good. So this slide deck I have is just the Dublin slide with a public meeting.
Great. Well,
comment. So we can talk about that. We can talk about anything. I think everybody here has been at these before, so I don't know that we need like the whole introduction. What is Alpha Omega? If you guys have questions, this is, you know, this is for everybody outside of the core team to poke and ask questions. And
yeah, I'm new, Michael.
oh, sorry about that, Warren. Welcome. We can. How familiar are you with Alpha Omega? Just so we know what do you got?
I think I got the gist of what's going on in it. I was with the Linux Foundation. I used to run kind of a similar work group that was related to the core infrastructure initiative.
Oh, you know what? I recognize your name from way back, like 2016, maybe.
Yeah. That's where your name. I think David's a familiar face as well.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think I sort of get what you're doing here based on what we did there.
Warren, I'm going to flip this back around. I would love to hear from you in terms of your experiences and how you were able to, get things done, or where you were frustrated, or what worked, what didn't work, or what you wish you knew then. You know, we're certainly always open to like hearing from people who have walked down various roads before.
Okay.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you have a deck?
No, I don't have a deck that's doesn't have a lot of mold on it, but
Lauren, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, so
yeah, I figured it would kind of rear its ugly head again. If anything that was frustrating from my perspective, it was mostly IBM related, but I think the work that we had done there was basically, for those who don't know what that is, and like I said, I think Michael and David they seem familiar faces, and I think they remember, maybe Vicky even, maybe Vicky, no. Anyway, so what we had done was, I had put an effort together to say, where could we direct funding that would be the most effective for the industry in general, was the basic premise. So, obviously companies like IBM and Microsoft have gargantuan portfolios that would tend to run over smaller companies. So my premise also included the perspective that company size doesn't matter. So just tell me what your top 10, I think it was either top 10 or top 20 open source problem children are. And that was, from a vulnerability management perspective. And that was left open-ended intentionally, because I saw the world one way, and I think some other companies saw the world a slightly different way in terms of what they viewed problem children as. My view of the world was, if you get one vulnerability, how many products does it cause you pain for, and therefore what is your greatest cost if you do get a vulnerability, and God forbid it's a global threat that you have to fix quickly. Other companies had some different ideas, and I forget who had what ideas at this point, but it really all worked out in the end. Probably the biggest struggle that we had for quite a while was convincing legal teams to pony up their list of problem children, because that would tend to give you some sort of a insight into kind of where the weak links were for that company's portfolio. So
painfully aware of this problem.
So Warren, we've actually had this conversation with a couple of industry associations, and they seem to be more comfortable with this if they can sort of hide behind the fig leaf of the association, so it's not
Exactly.
direct feeling that,
and that is exactly where we went with this. So what I did is I made an oath to all the companies and the lawyers that my interest in this was not an interest solely on the behalf of IBM, nor was it an interest that was routed in any competition. It was routed in, let's try to fix this as an industry consortium, because if we don't band together, we are going to fail. I mean, I forget who some of you work for. I mean, I'm going to pick on Michael here just because it's an easy target. Obviously, Microsoft and IBM in various circles are very competitive. On the other hand, we both are using infrastructure that is virtually identical based on open source. So let's go yak here for a while about container deployment. Let's talk about virtualization. Let's talk, you can pick those technologies that are sore spots for everybody, and then let's go work on those. Now, in retrospect here now, I mean, there's a lot of activity, with the OpenSSF that causes me a little bit of angst, because yeah, sure, as a group here, we could sit down and talk about our top 10 list or a top 20 list or whatever we want, and that's great. That's not a bad thing, but it's the log4j's of the world that get you. So how do we solve, when edicts come down that says, you really can't put out products that have, known critical and high vulnerabilities in them? Well, that's easy to say in practice, but when you get down to it and you say, well, that means I need to have somebody in my organization that has the ability to contribute to every open source package that we consume. And I'd be shocked if you guys aren't banging on the same, same here. So, I can't possibly have, I don't forget the number of the open source packages IBM consumes in their product portfolio, but it's 10,000 plus. It's it's ridiculous, and I'm sure that you guys run into that same kind of numbers. It's so how do we go solve that problem is my other little current thorn in my side.
Warren, it's very consistent with how we've been experiencing it, both sort of in Alpha Omega and also what we're doing at Google, and I think others have experienced the same thing. It's very easy to talk about the most critical projects. Almost by definition, the more critical those projects are, the more eyes are paying attention to them because the dependencies, right?
Yep.
And so, we have, I mean, with OpenSSF, I think we're also still working through that problem. With Alpha Omega, we have found leverage in looking at essentially other organizations that have points of leverage themselves, where they can go off and apply and start to create cultural changes across a broader set of projects. But it varies dramatically by the governance model of the project, or by the sort of governance model of the foundation, the projects in that foundation, or just even the culture within a particular project. It can vary quite dramatically.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we have variances in culture within our brands that have different tolerances for different things, and different opinions about how quickly something can or should get fixed. Stability versus speed of action. You guys must be running into all those same things too.
We've tried to emphasize and focus on sort of an aspect of directness in terms of what we can get done, right? And one of the ways I describe this, and I'm sort of repeating myself from some of the conversations, but welcome to the conversation, is OpenSSF working groups are designing the future of software supply chain security. And it's an important future. we're looking at it from the point of view of what can we do right now? Some which will be to bring that future sooner, to accelerate adoption of key things. And some of it's just like, well, what can we do to make a difference right now? And what experiments can we run to learn from that that can feed back into, better insights moving down the road.
Okay.
Anyway, welcome to the conversation. Very happy to have you here. Michael, you want
I'm glad to be part of it, as I was looking forward to this after sort of watching the Slack channel for a month or so.
Awesome. Yeah. So I mean, in like 60 seconds, the just to reiterate kind of the mission and the vision that we have, so it is, and as Michael said, like the difference between Alpha, Omega, and other things is this kind of direct maintain your engagement, expert analysis. It's not about improving, like we wouldn't work on like a standard, like Vex as a vulnerability exchange, like data standard. If that came across like, hey, should Alpha Omega work on this? It should be a resounding no. But is the well, if you look at the alpha engagements that we have, it's clear. It should be clear, hopefully, that the types of work that we fund, why we do it, and and kind of rolling up our sleeves and getting into the affecting like real security change in real projects and real specific projects. So the division that we have is that these critical open source projects are secure. It's not every open source project. It's it is the critical ones. For Alpha, it's the top 100. For Omega, it's the top 10,000 ish. 10,000 covers quite a bit though of like the risk, like the aggregate risk landscape.
Yeah, that's actually where I was going to go in terms of asking you guys. Have you looked at this from a, I know there's plenty of discussions out there that talk about, CVS is dead. Have you looked at these from a risk-based approach versus purely a CVSS approach? Because I don't think CVS is dead. I think it's just one of the keys in the kingdom.
Yeah. So you should clarify. Two different axes here. One is critical projects being projects that are very important or widely used or foundational or platformy or things like that.
Right.
You could argue that a very widely used project that has 1 or 0 maintainers and is in a atrophying state is riskier than a lesser used project that has, or whatever, like,
yeah, sure.
So there is a risk axis of the project itself. How likely is this to cause us pain in the future?
Right.
What we have from the Security and Critical Projects Working Group is the list of critical projects. Now, in their list is an aggregate list of other lists. Some of those other lists have included some elements of risk. We actually just started talking about this just recently, that it would be interesting to take a more intentional lens over that. These are the critical projects, and essentially sort them by risk, or take a larger list and sort them by a larger list and sort them by risk. The problem that I think we've had is, as an industry, we've had years and years and years of, hey, someone needs to come up with a risk metric on open source. And then everybody goes away, and 3 years later, somebody says, hey, we should have a risk metric for open source. And like, there's no like, that I'm aware of, like, definitive thing that most people agree on.
I could see that, yeah.
I'm also okay with like any metric is okay. The worst that we would do, and this was one of the reasons that we haven't blocked anything in Alpha Omega on answering this question, is, let's say we're wrong, and we wind up funding, well, we're funding Python. And let's say after we do the whole risk metric thing, we realize that Python isn't like the 5th most important project to fund. It's like the 50th. Well, it's still the 50th out of 3 million projects. So
yeah,
it almost, it matters less to get the prioritization right, and more just like it's clumpy up at the top. Just do them all, do lots of them, learn and iterate.
Well,
and
right.
if
That's,
risk
no,
measures
that's an approach I like is if you can iterate faster, even if you didn't get the measurement accurate, you at least can say whoops and iterate and see what happens again.
If I may jump in, I think that one of the challenges for trying to measure this with any, we're going to measure it down to the last digit, is fundamentally for every organization, what's important is what's important to them. And
Right.
different people are going to have a different set no matter what we do. But as Michael Scavetta noted, whether it's number 50 or number 5, focused investment that improves it will improve things for a lot of people and a lot of organizations. And the goal is to make a significant improvement.
Yeah, it's like the top 10 movies. Like if you're number 7 or number 2, like it doesn't matter. So for Alpha, as Michael was saying, we are intentional about, or at least we've been intentional so far about this kind of scaled impact and leverage. And what this really means is, instead of working with individual project with individual maintainer or individual set of individual maintainers, we look for places where we can affect either an ecosystem as a whole, or hundreds of important projects. Because we feel like, number one, we just from a bandwidth perspective on our side, some of this was just pragmatic, that we are still hiring, and because we don't have anybody to work on this kind of full time, we didn't want to be bottlenecked by just the bandwidth that we had. So we figured that we could have the foundation hire someone to do that work and then just kind of report summaries back to us. I think that's been pretty good. And then on the Omega side, it's all about automation and triage. This is the remove pollution from the ocean kind of scenario where we look through these top 10,000 open source projects. We look for critical vulnerabilities. If we find any, then we report them, but we don't pre-engage maintainers on that. It's just not feasible. And that's been, we think that by hitting it from both sides, we'll get to the point where we can, affect substantial change in the most critical projects and make sure that the rest of the important ones are have some degree of understanding about them.
What is the general landscape versus stuff in Linux distros intersection look like? I mean, have you been paying attention to Linux distro packages, or are you sort of letting the distros kind of deal with that and looking at the other ecosystems out there? What's that look like?
And
Great.
Yeah.
I don't have a great answer for you. I have sort of like how I worry about it right now. I think that the major distros have, like Debian has done a lot of work towards reproducibility on builds. And that's not the only thing that matters, but it's a really interesting sort of progress checkpoint. And, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, I hosted a summit at Google. I invited a bunch of people to talk about sort of their DevOps world and various things. And I started talking to them about software supply chain security and vulnerability management across their space. And to a person, we had like 50 CTOs and engineering VPs there. And all of them were like, I'm currently very busy keeping up with vulnerabilities on my operating packages. I have operationalized that to some extent, but please don't tell my security folks about language package problems. They'll shut me down. And so I think that for all that there are real problems across the ecosystem, I think that, so going back to your earlier point about where the criticality has been and where attention has been paid, where operationalized solutions have been put in place, it's better at the operating system level than it is at the language package level. That's not a lot.
I was going to guess that's somewhat true, but yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, I think there's almost a false confidence there. It's a little bit dangerous to be, don't get cocky, kid. But there's sort of like raging fires of bad behavior, bad practices, sorry, across various parts of the ecosystem. But like the operating system distros have really had to get their stuff together, right? And they have intentionally focused on it. It's what they do. And they are curating a set of things that work together and updating them when vulnerabilities are found. Like that is the operational model. And honestly, full credit to Microsoft, who 20 years ago had a huge problem with vulnerabilities in Windows and wandered down the hard road of getting Windows to be more and more self-updating rather than waiting for users to do it themselves. And then the balance of having IT admins not have the system change underneath them when it was being secure. And so I think that culture of operating systems that take care of themselves is becoming, I wouldn't say fully expected, but pretty much like you'd be nuts not to be using one that did that, right?
Yeah. I do think that, in addition to that, the homogeneity of so if you take Debian, there's a way to build an arbitrary Debian package. It's like a pretty well-defined thing. And similar, I believe, for practically all the major distros. The fact that it's so standard means that more tools could be applied, or more and better tools could be applied in the right places. So, like as an interesting experiment, it would be interesting to reach out to Debian or Ubuntu or somebody and say, how would you feel about like running static analysis as part of your ingestion pipeline, and what would you want to look for and things like that, or at least give visibility over what's already being done, as opposed to some of the larger ecosystem where things are kind of all over the map and there isn't a natural single choke point for.
Yeah, and that's what I see as a tough point, is that at least with the distros, you've got as you said, a choke point, whereas with the rest of the infrastructure, you don't.
Randall?
I work for Gentoo and I'm a maintainer of Homebrew. So I have some insight here. But we don't run security tools. And I think that most of the people I work with would be heavily against that.
In the way that they would not want let's just say a garbage tool blocking or making their life more complicated because it spits out kind of nonsense, or
so it depends, right? Because like, for example, in Gentoo, a lot of our e-builds, like Arch will source a lot of their stuff on our stuff. And then like Debian, they're kind of strange. And Debian's not a good example, just so you know, because they have a very tainted relationship with upstream. So yeah. But it kind of depends. But regardless, like most distros but Debian will not take security into consideration. In other words, we kind of take whatever upstream wants, will enforce type of stance. Debian will switch packages and will have like they'll actually modify things so that they work more in like a Debian form. And the reason that I said they have a tainted relationship with upstream is because one of the most irritating things that like GNOME has going on is when they get issue tickets that they didn't cause, that were caused by Debian's modifications. And then it turns into this finger pointing contest that'll get real political and pretty much starts a holy war, or can start a holy war.
Yeah. I guess the question then, if you start with the premise that, if you had a crystal ball and you knew that among, pick like a representative sample of common packages, either used or slightly modified and used in Linux systems, and you knew that X percentage of them had serious vulnerabilities, is there a way of leveraging the distros versus going out to each individual upstream project and engaging them independently?
This might be an opinionated answer, but
What we're here for.
There's a way of leveraging Gentoo. There's a way of leveraging Portage because they deal with source code. So there's definitely a way of doing that. However, like in homebrew, for example, we have this saying that is homebrew should be your last line of defense and should not be depended on. It is not a security tool.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, like they will be hard on that stance, if that makes sense.
Yep. I'm glad we didn't start with trying to solve the Linux package. Try to move on this, but that's really good insight. I appreciate that.
Well, homebrew is actually Mac OS, but it is agnostic. So there is a Linux side of it, not that a lot of people use it outside of myself and like, I think 25 other people. But I mean, it does exist. It is possible. I know VS Code tries to use it as their package manager.
Really? I didn't know that.
What?
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, they like if you actually start going into like the dev container environments, they'll offer, hey, do you want to install homebrew? So yeah, which it makes sense, right? Because I mean, like what they're trying to do. But yeah, like Debian would be interesting. It would be interesting to get their point of view. You see, I'm highly against politics and like turning everything into religion. So I do think their point of view, I mean, they do have a stance, you know, but like, yeah, like most upstream projects, like I'm sure Brian could probably tell you stories about why Debian's HTTPD package is entirely different from all the other ones.
Yeah. I wonder if this is a good, some folks are putting together a virtual summit for maintainers of critical software projects. And I wonder if we should be intentional about inviting folks from, you know, Debian and, you know, obviously Gentoo and you know, other distros to kind of represent that perspective at the summit.
I believe there are 9 parent distros, just so you know, because there are basically 9 main packaging teams.
Do you have information about that summit? And for the record, I do think it's very smart to start at least inviting the people from the distros, whether they choose to be there or not is, you know, up to them, but making sure that they have an opportunity to be heard and to share their perspectives, because they really are very, very important.
Yep. There's a channel in Slack called Virtual Summit of Software Maintain. It's obvious, like the name, but there should be links in there to the docs that we're working on and all that.
Can one of the Michaels drop that a link to the docs into the chat for those of us who don't use the Slack? Yep.
Do you want a link to the Slack? I'll post a link to the Slack, and I'll also find the original doc.
No, I don't use the Slack client. I use IRC Cloud, so I can keep everything.
You're cool.
I am old school, and you can pry IRC out of my dead cold fingers.
You want to know something funny? So one of the funniest holy wars we ever had at Gentoo was, shall we start a Discord?
You know what? No, honey, that is not funny. I've been in those holy wars so many times in so many different communities. I have PTSD.
Well, I get enjoyment out of it. I don't know. I'm weird.
Yes, but we love you.
But just so you know, I can spearhead any communication to distros. I'm very in touch with all of them.
That would be awesome.
Even the very obscure ones, because So if you want, I can try to get all 9 parent distros and homebrew, because I do consider them important, even though they're not considered a parent distro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think anything that gets more problem solvers to the table.
And for the record, I had an action item from this meeting from last time to talk to Mike, and I did get a chance to talk to them, but I think maybe we could have a meeting about what exactly do we want to be asking like people like Mike in terms of like Alpha Omega, because I basically pointed him to the page with Michael Scovetta and Brian's presentation. And he
Hey.
was like, sounds cool, but what do you guys want to do?
Yeah.
All right, Michael, I got to drop.
Yep.
Good luck.
Thanks, Michael.
Yep, bye.
Cool. So let's see. There's a good conversation. We should keep going. Am I frozen? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, we
It
hear
looks
you.
like my window is frozen, so it doesn't matter. So we have gotten some stuff done with AO over the past. I think we've been around for I think we just hit 8 months. So first, we have a PM that joined our team. This is Anna from City.
Now you did freeze,
And
Michael.
following
I
up.
was going to say, now he's frozen. Yeah.
Really?
Yep. Say something, Michael. No. Anybody else there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm here. This is David Wheeler. Michael's frozen. Very inopportune time.
Sorry.
Michael, if you can hear us, you might want to try turning off your video camera sometimes. That helps. But I am not seeing or hearing him.
he's left and is returning again. So we now have 2 Michael Scavettas, which is awesome because that's twice the fun and twice the work done. And except you're muted, my friend. There you go.
Of course. No, this is exactly what I need. If I just do this a bunch of times, we'll be all set.
Okay.
This is why I recommend Linux desktop.
Yeah. All right, let me share again. All right. So,
Michael, if you want, you can send me a URL. I can share it or whatever. But right now it's working, so let's not.
I'm not going
bump
to
the
touch
cart.
it. Yep. Okay. So in recent news, I want to welcome Anna from City to the Alpha Omega team. She's helping us from the PM side, just kind of get things done and stay organized and keep things moving. As we do more Alpha engagements, the work to just maintain and keep up on what we're already doing and status and things like that goes up. So it is awesome that we have Anna on our team, and John can't hear this, but John Meadows from City, thank you so much for supporting us and essentially lending us Anna for however long we need her. So we talked about this at the summit in Dublin, but we really wanted to focus on we've been doing this for 8 months. Have we actually helped the world be a safer, better place? And while 8 months is not super long, we can talk about some of the impact that we've had so far. So in April we gave $300K to Node to essentially hire, well, they're contractors, but they're staff doing security things for Node that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So they've been able to, they rely primarily on a volunteer model for vulnerability triage. He was kind of burning them out. So they have a contractor now that's helping to do this stuff. They've been issuing fixes. They reactivated the Node security working group, which I think ended in maybe 2018, but don't quote me on that. That includes doing a security process improvements, threat model for Node. They just released a experimental permissions model for Node. My understanding of this is that it lets you say, I am left pad, I need nothing other than compute. If none of my dependencies should require anything more than compute either, which means that if someone takes over a sub dependency of left pad, you can't get more permissions for it. So it's an interesting approach. Obviously, mobile apps tend to rely a lot on capabilities and permissioning. Applying that to Node, I think, is a really interesting experiment. And then just doing things like adding vuln checking to the Node.js CI and things like that. They've been great. They've been providing monthly updates back on what they've accomplished, and I think that kind of set the model for the other engagements. So we announced 400K to Eclipse. They started running with this. I think it was actually mid-July that they started actually like working on this stuff, but they ran scorecard across every Eclipse project. I think it's like 270 Eclipse projects, I believe. They found some dangerous workflows, and they came up with essentially just from that part, a list of basically a backlog of security work to go do, enabling Dependabot, branch protection, things like that. I think one of the big benefits I think is going to be getting projects to enable static analysis. Eclipse has a model of how projects interact with the Eclipse Foundation, which is a bit different than how it works in Apache and some other organizations. So we're trying to learn and use see Eclipse as like a test bed of like, well, what works for foundations like this. So they've been great to work with, and expecting some more updates in October from them. Similarly, Python, another 400K, hiring a full-time security captain. We want to see a security audit of PyPy, the infrastructure, and then more generally, understanding security issues across CPython and PyPy, and getting them, addressed in some way. So essentially, just being able to accelerate and put more oomph behind security in these important foundations. We did also announce Rust last month. There was an article that Rust. I think it was, so this was joint between Alpha Omega and JFrog. So between the two of us, we funded the Rust, essentially the Rust security program, or formal Rust security program, where they're looking at the build infrastructure, a threat model, and again, just generally improving the security of Rust writ large. So these examples are good because they are that leveraged, the leverageness where we work with the foundation figures out exactly what to do. And I think that's what I should have mentioned earlier. When we engage these foundations and we talk to Rust, the conversation wasn't, hey, Rust, we would like, we've thought about your problems and we've written down this list and we'll give you money to make this list better. It wasn't that way at all. It was, hey, Rust, you're super important to the open source ecosystem. We have funding available. What kind of security work keeps you up at night that you would like to work on? And if you had funding, you could do more of. So in each of these, the activities were almost exclusively, I mean, there was some conversation back and forth, but it primarily came from the foundations themselves. And I think that's one of the benefits of doing it that way, is that it's more palatable to the organization and they don't feel like someone from the outside is coming in and dictating what they need to do. I think that would be a quick way to fail.
What sort of strikes me here is each one of these is slightly different, not surprising, but how could we take what was successful and sort of offer a set of recommendations to a broader set of foundations to say, well, this worked really well over here, this worked really well over here. Yes, we can't give everybody $460,000, but
I think so there is like kind of a meta lessons to be learned, and if I were to guess, what we will learn is that having a full-time security captain or champ or whatever you want to call them within the organization that is responsible for thinking about these things and then trying to drive them is like one important part. So if there's nobody that has a security hat, first step one is get somebody with a security hat. And then beyond that, though, it is different for each one. And I think that's why it's important to have someone with a security hat where you can say, our biggest problem is our build and CI infrastructure is kind of the bottom is rotting out from underneath it. We need like, that's the high order bit. And how does that impact security and things like that? But
Well, it seems like in the case of Rust, I mean, certainly this, prepare a threat model of the Rust ecosystem would be a very encompassing and important step for everything.
Mhm. Yep.
Not just Rust, but I'm a big proponent of understanding what your threats are. That way you can do that risk analysis about where is the biggest weed I need to go chop down.
totally.
How do we encourage more of that?
Yeah.
So many times we find that threat models are, while they may be mandatory, people say, oh, yeah, we're done with development. We'll create a threat model now. You go, geez.
Yeah. Or your threat model is just your data flow diagram, in which case it's kind of forgot about the threats. Vicky?
I'm especially pleased to see that y'all have done this with Rust. When I heard this, I immediately thought, man, what if someone had done this for C, like, 30 years ago? So now that Rust is shipping in the kernel and is becoming much, much more a part of the overall ecosystem and just growing at an incredible rate, getting it at this point and helping at this point is just going to have ripple effects that, in 10 years, we're going to look back at this and go, oh yeah, you're killing it, Michaels. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, huge props to the team for being able to get in there and work with the Rust community for this.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And to be honest, like I don't want to take too much credit because like this was practically all on the Rust side. This was the conversation that they kind of started. It was very easy to work with, and kind of the easiest part of this is like finding the money to give them. It's like all the lifting is on their side. So, but that's actually one of the things that I want to be able to do better in the future is have resources within OpenSSF that can augment this stuff. So, does it make sense for, Rust to hire a security assurance person who is just like all about threat modeling full time? Like, no, probably not. It's probably a 3-month exercise and maybe money can do that, but maybe there are folks within OpenSSF and the organizations that we're a part of that makes more sense to do. So having better connective tissue between the engagements that we have on the alpha side and the capabilities that exist in OpenSSF but aren't being leveraged would be interesting to pull on, I guess. So we talked about this in Dublin. We are talking to jQuery. We think that the jQuery's place in the ecosystem warrants an engagement here. jQuery is also different, and I think you picked up on this. Like most of our engagements are different than the other ones, and some of that's intentional. Like some of it's not, but this one at least is intentional. That we wanted to work with a project as opposed to a foundation of projects, so we're currently talking about like so actually those plans probably are going to be what winds up shaking out of this, but we probably have at least another couple of weeks before this is kind of final and we're good to go. But essentially, it's jQuery has interesting jQuery is interesting because it's ubiquitous. So I think 77% of the top 10 million sites use jQuery. And the number of folks using a very old version of jQuery is very significant. So you have that kind of social problem. How do you encourage folks to upgrade, and is it even worth it? And like what's the ROI on that and all that stuff? And how do you target the blog that I wrote in 2014 that I still have hosted and have long forgotten about? In addition to the fact that jQuery doesn't rev versions very often, but the way that they distribute. So if I were an attacker, getting into the deployment pipeline for jQuery means I can affect 77% of the top 10 million sites pretty rapidly. So it is it's just an interesting point on the I don't know, threat landscape.
So when you say the plan is to conduct a security audit, is that synonymous with threat modeling, or is that something else that has different aspects of?
I would, so it depends. OSTIF, OSTIF tends to do a lot of these. I'm not saying the word definitely use OSTIF, but like, you know, their methodology is usually kind of start with like understanding the design and the parameters and the edges of the thing, and then go in and look at the code. So we do think that, you know, looking at jQuery source code from an audit perspective is interesting, but I think that the larger threat model of how is it used, the plugin ecosystem around jQuery is really interesting, and I think that should be part of that. But it's, you know, it would be tailored for the engagement, and you know, we'll kind of.
Yeah,
We'll see
to grossly oversimplify the look of the design that helps them figure out which code to look at, because it takes too long to look at everything. But if you don't look at some code, there's a problem, because obviously a bad implementation can lead to disaster.
Yeah. That was all alpha side. On the Omega side, we've done a bit of stuff. We have hopefully 2 hires starting soon. To kind of make this real. So this has all been kind of in the spaces in between kind of work, but we did release an analysis tool chain. So Microsoft, we contributed this to OpenSSF. So it's out there on the GitHub site, but this is CodeQL and a bunch of other tools kind of orchestrated together. So you can just point at an open source project and go. It's been pretty successful. We found I think 11 or 12 now vulnerabilities. Most of these are I think most of these are either like, so it's like the node one is a it looks for an OpenSSL configuration in some non-existent directory, but if it does exist in your system, then it would load the default OpenSSL config from there. Moment is 2 RCE things, or at least code execution things. JS hint is code execution, but in a script that isn't used. So some of these, you know, have CVE, some of them don't. We're not really worrying too much about, like, you know, they have to have a CVE or anything like that. We just really want to get the problem fixed and kind of move on. But we've also been doing these kind of fully automated security reviews where we run the tools against a target. And if the results come back completely clean, then we assert that cleanliness in the form of a security review. So essentially, if these 6 checks come back with nothing significant, then we publish something into the security reviews OpenSSF project. It's an experiment. I don't know if this is the right way to do it going forward. I would think some sort of a more of a formal assertion or skit ledger mabob thing would be the right long-term thing to do. But we wanted to be able to express that, like, that at least a tool looked at this and didn't find anything. So goals for the next 6 months, we want to do more alpha engagements. So we have not spent all the money that we have. We need to do better at spending more of the money so that we can get more. We want to have more impact through vulnerabilities that we find through Omega. Realistically, I want to have a list of the top 10,000 and a checkbox or an X next to the ones that we've looked at or on the backlog or whatever, to show that these have had at least some level of looked atness.
How does a project get signed up for Omega? Is it sort of, it gets nominated or something similar to like Coverity stuff, or?
So honestly, we because we don't have the staff yet. So the two folks that we're hiring are to work specifically on Omega. So one of the things that they'll figure out is like what that should look like. The easiest answer would be to just take the critical score OpenSSF project, which has the top 100,000 ranked by criticality, and just top 10,000 of that. And that's convenient because I believe that list is, I think those are all GitHub projects, so they're easy to just kind of go with and analyze from there. But because this is a scaled thing, I don't see any reason not to nominate projects or have a button of just like, please include me, or something like that, because it should be the cost of the incremental cost of adding one more project should be kind of trivial there. We want to investigate additional funding sources because right now this is funded just by Microsoft and Google. We want that to be more diverse. As I mentioned, we want better connective tissue between OpenSSF, security vendors. Like we want this all to be as effective as possible, and whatever avenue means that would lead us to be more effective, we want to do that. And then we have an annual report that we are drafting now that I am targeting to get public by the end of the month, which will talk about what we've accomplished, what our plans are, what year two we want to look like, and just kind of a discussion on that stuff, what we've learned.
Is the amounts of funding Microsoft and Google are putting to this public record?
Yeah, 2.5 million apiece.
Okay.
And there's a, I mean, I think there's like an officially a call for like other organizations to join at that level and be part of that. We're certainly willing to accept less, especially in a undirected kind of put money in the pot to have us, just do more of what we're doing. So we
Got it. No, that's handy.
Yeah.
I'll have to see if I can shame Jamie Thomas into some dollars.
I would be, yes.
She's not easy to shame.
Well, we should do it. So yeah, so the final slide that we usually end with is like, how do you get involved? And we've been kind of for up until a few months ago, like our answer was like, just get involved in the working groups. Like the way that Alpha Omega works kind of transparently is through meetings like this, the Slack channel, places like this. So everybody's welcome to come and talk about whatever at these. But the decision making in Alpha Omega is this kind of more core, we'll say private group that kind of makes these decisions. But for anyone out there, like the analysis tool chain is out there, so folks can run it and improve it, and we'll accept PRs and all that stuff. If folks have an idea of like that they would like to work with us on something, like by all means, please get in touch. We're at the end of the day, if we if critical projects are more secure and if vulnerabilities are found and fixed faster, we're happy. So whatever gets us to that road is something we'd be interested in talking about. In the slide deck. But yeah, I think it's been interesting. So looking forward to continuing it and being able to because they should, well, we'll show that now. One of the risks I think that we have going out maybe 2 or 3 years is that by us providing the funding for this security work, particularly on the Alpha side, that these foundations become dependent on us. And that itself is a risk that we don't want to like create unnecessarily. So as we move forward, I think one of the things that we're going to try to be more intentional about is working with these foundations to build up the essentially the funding from other disparate sources to take on more security work. So the same way that the foundations should be, you know, they have budget for infrastructure or legal support or whatever, like security should be one of those. And then however they get funded with the other ones, like how to expand that to include security. And the reality is that today, a lot of these foundations are funded far less than folks on the outside would, you know, might imagine. And so maybe the way that we work with them is to essentially lend our voice to the chorus of, you know, particularly enterprises that are highly dependent on projects from these foundations should put their money where their mouth is and fund the organizations in order to make that happen. So we're not looking to like provide security help and then like pull the rug away from under them. But as we move forward, I think we're going to be more intentional about encouraging them to build up the muscle on their own so that they can be sustainable over time. So. Any final thoughts? Awesome. Well, if that is it, folks get 3 minutes back. I really appreciate everybody's time and terrific conversation today. And let's keep it going. I'm particularly interested in the moving forward with the you know, what do we do about Linux distros and the virtual summit? I think would be great. So I will, Randall, let's just be in touch and try to make something happen there.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Michael,
you.
thank you so very much. All right, Michael, thank you so much.